let's talk about the nervous system. The nervous system is a complex network of nerves and cells that carry messages to and from the brain and the spinal cord to various parts of the body. The nervous system includes both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system.
The central nervous system is made up of the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. The peripheral nervous system consists of sensory neurons, ganglia, clusters of neurons, and nerves that connect to one another and to the central nervous system.
The peripheral nervous system breaks down into somatic and autonomic. The sensory somatic nervous system consists of 12 cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. All the spinal nerves are mixed. They contain both sensory and motor neurons. They carry the sensory information from the sensory organs to the CNS and relay motor commands to the muscles, controls voluntary movements.
The autonomic nervous system are largely involuntary, meaning they happen without thinking about it, such as breathing and blinking. It consists of sensory neurons and motor neurons that run between the central nervous system and various internal organs such as the heart, lungs, and both exocrine and endocrine glands. It is responsible for monitoring conditions in the internal environment and bringing about appropriate changes in them. The contraction of both smooth muscle and cardiac muscle is controlled by the motor neurons of the autonomic system.
The autonomic nervous system subdivides into two systems, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system controls the body's response to a perceived threat and is responsible for the fight or flight response.
The parasympathetic nervous system, PNS, controls homeostasis and the body at rest, and is responsible for the body's rest and digest function.
The brain is like a central computer that controls all bodily functions, and the nervous system is like a network that relays messages back and forth from the brain to different parts of the body. There are 4 regions of the brain: the cerebral hemisphere, diencephalon, brainstem, and cerebellum. The cerebral hemisphere, cerebrum, is the largest part of the brain. The cerebrum has 2 hemispheres. The surface is made of ridges, gyri, and grooves sulci.
They have fissures that divide the cerebrum into lobes: frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe. The frontal is located anterior to the parietal lobe and posterior to the forehead. It works on complex thinking like planning and making decisions. The parietal is located posterior to the frontal lobe and anterior to the occipital lobe. It processes messages such as touch, taste, and temperature. The occipital is located posterior to the brain and processes visual information from the eyes. The temporal lobe is located inferior to the frontal and parietal lobe and processes hearings and involved in memory retrieval.
The cerebrum has specialized areas called the somatic sensory area, primary motor area, and the Broca's area. The somatic sensory area receives impulses from the body's sensory receptors. The primary motor area sends impulses to the skeletal muscles, and the Broca's area is involved in our abilities to speak.
The diencephalon sits on top of the brainstem. It is made up of 3 parts: the epithalamus, thalamus, and the hypothalamus. The thalamus is the relay station for sensory impulses, and it transfers impulses to the correct part of the cortex for localization and interpretation. The hypothalamus, located under the thalamus, is important to the autonomic nervous system. They regulate metabolism and body temperature and controls water balance.
The brainstem attaches to the spinal cord, and it is made up of midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. The midbrain is mostly composed of tracts of nerve fibers, a collection of axons. It is the reflex centers for vision and hearing. The pons are the bulging center part of the brainstem. It includes nuclei involved in the control of breathing. The medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brainstem. It is the control centers of heart rate, blood pressure, regulation, breathing, swallowing, and vomiting.
The cerebellum provides involuntary coordination of body movements and balance.
The nervous system contains billions of neurons. Neurons are the specialized cells that transmit messages to other nerve cells such as muscles and gland cells. They are able to respond to stimuli such as touch and sound, conduct impulses, and communicate with each other. The nucleus is located in the cell body, and extending from the cell body are the dendrites that conducts impulses towards the body, and axons that conducts impulses away from the body. The axon is covered with Schwann cells that makes myelin. In between the Schwann cells are called the notorambiur. It allows nerve impulses to move along the neuron.
From there, the neurotransmitters are released in the axon terminal. Neurons are able to respond to stimuli because there is an unequal distribution of ions on the two sides of a nerve cell membrane. In the axon terminal, there is a junction between the nerves called the synapse, and within the synapse, there is a gap between the axon and the next cell called the synaptic cleft. It is used to transmit signals between cells, and this transfer is therefore known as a synaptic connection.
Action potential is the change in electrical potential associated with the passage of an impulse along the membrane of a muscle cell or nerve cell. An action potential occurs when the neuron sends information down an axon away from the cell body. It's an explosion of electrical activity that is created by a depolarizing current, meaning the stimulus causes the resting potential to move towards 0 MV. When the depolarization reaches about -55 MV, a neuron will fire an action potential.
The depolarization activates the sodium channels in the neuron. These channels open, sodium flows into the cell and depolarizes the membrane. The sodium channels closes and potassium channels open. The flow of potassium ions out of the cell repolarizes the membrane potential back to its resting level. The potassium channels close and the sodium channels return to their resting closed state. The cell is ready to fire another action potential when stimulated again. This show is brought to you by Ms. Vo's Anatomy and Physiology class 4th period. A student here in American Canyon High School has suddenly collapsed while performing on stage.
Good morning, my name is Reiko Asahara. Today is the 16th of October and we have breaking news. Chris Brown has collapsed while performing on stage. Here is Bella Tapia to tell us in full detail what happened to Chris.
Thank you, Trina. He was admitted to the hospital nearby. The blood test came back and he had a blood alcohol level of 0.2. Since he weighs 205 pounds, this blood level is equivalent to consuming 10 drinks in 1 hour.
The effects of alcohol can vary depending on the amount of drug consumed and also the level of BAC reached. When they reach a BAC level of 0.03 through 0.12%, they tend to feel a state of intense excitement. They also become more daring. Their attention span shortens, and also they may say a thought comes to mind before thinking otherwise.
If they have reached the BAC level of 0.09 to 0.25%, they have trouble understanding or remembering things and their body movements are uncoordinated and tend to easily lose their balance. As they approach a level of around 0.18% to 0.30%, they are in the state of confusion, where they have slurred speech and their emotions are heightened.
As they continuously intake more alcohol in their body and reaches a BAC level of around 0.25% to 0.40%, they cannot respond to stimuli and don't have the ability to move. And at an extreme level of 0.40% to 0.50%, their body temperature decreases, they feel unconscious, their breathing is slower than usual and may die, and damages of the frontal lobes of the brain.
It causes an overall reduction in brain size and increase in the size of the ventricle. Serotonin neurotransmitter is a feel-good molecule and is very intimately related to your sense of well-being, which is tied to depression. It increases the serotonin levels in the brain, which is one of the reasons for the addicting effect of alcohol. Same goes with dopamine.
GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. Alcohol increases GABA activity, which in turn inhibits brain activity. Response time is usually increased. Someone under the influence of alcohol is less likely to respond quick enough to avoid accidents.
The short-term effects of drinking alcohol include slurred speech, drowsiness, vomiting, diarrhea, impaired judgment, and unconsciousness.
The long-term effects of drinking alcohol include alcohol poisoning, unintentional injuries, damage of central nervous system such as slower reactions and poor concentration, nerve damage, liver disease, and permanent damage to the brain.
The alcohol causes the ion channels to stay open longer, thus increasing the ion flow. The result is a much greater clotting effect on the brain because there are GABA receptors in many parts of the brain. Many different parts are affected. When GABA occupies a receptor, it decreases the neuron's electrical activity. There are key differences between chemical and electrical synapses. Because chemical synapses depend on the release of neurotransmitter molecules from synaptic vesicles to pass on their signal, there is an approximately 1 millisecond delay between the axon potential reaches the presynaptic terminal and when the neurotransmitter leads to opening of postsynaptic ion channels. Disruption of these synapses can cause seizures.
Along with alcohol, they also found another drug inside this body, methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, also called meth crystal, is an extremely addictive stimulant drug. They have discovered that Chris had taken the drug via smoking. Smoking the drug delivers very quickly to the brain, where it produces an immediate intense euphoria. Due to this, pleasure also takes quickly.
Methamphetamine can affect the brain by increasing the amount of the neurotransmitter dopamine, leading to high levels of that chemical in the brain. Dopamine is the experience of pleasure and motor functions. It also reduces motor skills and impaired verbal learning.
Along with that, it can cause severe structural and functional changes found in areas of the brain associated with emotion and memory. Meth begins its journey by entering the bloodstream, traveling to the brain, and invades into the sending neurons. From there, meth causes the chemical dopamine to unnaturally leak into the neuron and spill into the synapse.
At this point, meth blocks the transporters, resulting to recycle the dopamine back to the sending neurons. This overstimulates the brain and causing powerful wave of pleasures. It can last up to 8 to 12 hours. However, bodies cannot handle the excessive amounts of dopamine. Meth causes dopamine to flood receptors, which exhaust the dopamine supplies.
Meth can also affect the nervous system by enduring damage to the nervous system as usage increases. Some meth-dependent individuals also experience hallucinations that can be auditory, visual, or sensory in nature.
The long-term effects of people who use methamphetamine may experience negative consequences for physical health, including extreme weight loss, severe dental problems or meth mouth, skin sores caused by scratching, disorientation, apathy, confused exhaustion, liver, kidney, and lung damage, and many more.
The short-term effects of meth are loss of appetite, increased heart rate, blood pressure or body temperature, dilation of pupils, disturbed sleep patterns, nausea, bizarre, erratic, sometimes violent behavior, hallucinations, irritability, panic and psychosis, convulsions, seizures, and death from high dose.